Welcome back to yet another episode on Kobe MC Photography's channel. This video is going to be about dynamic range between the K3 Mark I and the K3 Mark III. Now, keep in mind that the K3 Mark I and the K3 Mark II are essentially the exact same camera. The only difference is a few features were removed to include other features. So the K3 Mark I has a built-in flash and does not have GPS or pixel shift. The K3 Mark II has pixel shift and built-in GPS, but does not have a flash. Other than that, they're the exact same camera with the exact same sensor. So dynamic range would be the same with the K3 Mark I and the K3 Mark II. So we're going to compare shadow recovery and highlight recovery between the K3 Mark III and the older K3 1/2 series of cameras. I have done a video in regards to the image quality comparison between the K3 Mark I and K3 Mark III. And I've also done a dynamic range video in regards to solely the K3 Mark III, but I haven't done a comparison between the K3 III and the K3. This has been requested numerous times since the K3 III came out, and I apologize it's taken so long. There's just so much information to go through because the K3 Mark III is a completely other world in regards to anything that Pentaxians have been used to in regards to their cameras. So yeah, I'm going to show you the setup. I'll show you what I'm going to be taking a shot of. Now, keep in mind, I am not going to do some ridiculous thing like underexpose the image so much that there's no photons hitting the sensor, because you cannot recover things that the camera can't see. Cameras record light. There has to be just even the slightest smidgen of light in order for the camera to recover shadow information. If it's complete and utter jet black, ain't nothing going to be there. So, I'm not going to do something that is just absurd in another manner. Well, I can't think of a better way to put it. It's absurd to underexpose so far down that nothing is recoverable and then saying, oh, look at that, it's absolutely terrible. That's not what we're going to do on my channel. So I'm going to keep it realistic, and we'll just look at what the actual quality is in regards to pulling up the shadows, and let's just get right down to the nitty gritty. Okay, so there's the scene that I'm going to be shooting. I'm not sure if you can see at the very, very back. There's a cordless home phone in the charger, and it is black. So, and it's in the shadow, and we've got a bit of, some browns, white, I think it's Vaseline, and some coasters, and TV remote with multiple colors. So this should be a good dynamic range test. There's a lot of dynamic range all across this one scene. Some plants, hard to see. There we go. So some plants, phone, another plant, and that stuff. Okay. Now I have the K3 Mark III set up with the 1650 f2.8 PLM, and I have the K3 Mark I right beside it, two tripods. It's mounted this way. I'm going to be swapping the 1650 PLM over to the K3. I'm not going to use the Sigma lens because that will change the actual dynamic range because it may not let in as much light as the 1650 PLM. So I want to keep everything as even as possible. I have the K3 Mark III set to simulate the exact exposure on the rear screen. So as you can see, it's dark. If I go to focus, it'll brighten up for a split second until it gets focused, then it goes back to what the scene actually looks like. So it is dark, and we're at -5 here. Let me just adjust that. Yep. So we're at -5 exposure there, and 1/60th of a second. But anyway, we'll get into that once we actually look at the images. So let's just get the images done and see how the recoveries go. Okay, so here is the base image at 0 EV. It's dead center, perfect exposure. This is the scene. Now, I did my absolute best to keep everything the same in regards to the overexposures and underexposures, just taking a look at the histogram, just to try to keep it as identical and as close as the original base image as possible. Because I'm not trying to do something where you're overdoing the dynamic range, right? You're trying to get a decent image out of various lighting situations. Now, the one thing I did find, which surprised me, and this made this a lot more difficult to try to get as evenly matched as possible, is that the Pentax K3 Mark I does not expose nearly the same as the Pentax K3 Mark III. The K3 Mark III seems to be just generally more highlight weighted. It underexposes, whereas the K3 Mark I overexposes. They completely meter differently, which you'll see in a minute. But here's -1. Here's -3. So as you can see, I tried to keep it as absolutely identical as possible. Here's -5, pushed up, and you can see the exposure compensation that I did. Yeah, so I mean, it's, let's go to +5. This is on the Pentax K3 Mark I. Let's go to +3, +1. Let's go to the D&G there. Yeah. So as you can see, I mean, +3 is pretty much the limit. You cannot, as you can see, I tried to bring the highlights down. Let's just compare with 0. Now, if you take a look at the flower pot area here, and let's go to 0. This remains the same. It's everything else within the exposure is just absolutely not recoverable, period, whatsoever. Even at, let's see, well, +5 is just it's completely gone, completely and utterly demolished. There's no recovery whatsoever. Maybe a tad bit, but the highlights are just so far gone. It's not possible. It's toast. It's done. It's finished. Now, just to give you a very quick idea here, let me just quickly pull up the K3 images, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So here's the base D&G, and here is -1. Here is -3. And you'll notice there is a slight color change with each iteration here. So that's -5. There's a very, very, very slight color change. Let's go back. Oh, and also if you look too at where the exposure and everything is, the exposures are completely different in regards to the two cameras in order to compensate to get the histogram as close as possible to the original image. Let's quickly go over to +5, and then we'll do a side-by-side comparison. But as you can see here, at +5, there is a lot more detail retention happening here, even when you do pull it down. I gave up on the K3 image because no matter what I did, nothing was recoverable. It just was not going to happen. It looked way worse than this did. So let's go to, this is actually +3, not 2. I messed up when I was doing the editing here. Not too bad. You can see a little bit of detail out here. Let's go to +1. But you can see the green for the grass is just gone. But all right, so let's just dive into doing a side-by-side comparison of the K3 Mark III with the same image from the K3 Mark I, and you'll see what the differences are for that. Okay, so here are the images side by side. This is -5 exposure values, 5 stops, whatever you want to call it. Technically, it's -5 EV, but so these are the D&Gs. Now, on the left side is the Pentax K3 Mark I. On the right side is the Pentax K3 Mark III. So let's go to, so that's -5. And now let's go to -3. Again, left side is the K3 Mark I, right side is K3 Mark III. Now, the K3 Mark III For the window area, it does look a tad brighter, just a tad, and it's a bit on the warmer side compared to the cool color of the Pentax K3 Mark 1. Now, I had to redo the K3 Mark 1 shot only because there was an issue. It wasn't quite in focus. I wanted to redo it, but by that time the lighting had changed a little bit, but I did readjust everything manually so that the exposure was the same. Let's go to 0, which I believe is this one here. Nope, that's -1. Okay, so this is -1 EV. And they do look similar, but if you actually happen to look out the window area on the Pentax K3 Mark 1 image, and again, just slightly on the side here, you'll notice it is a brighter image. The shadows are about the same, but anything mid-light and highlight area is brighter. This is 0, so let's just look at the base exposure here. And again, you can see the K3 Mark 1 exposes, it just seems more sensitive to the highlights. The highlights get blown out much, much easier. Now let's go to +1, and in +1, you can clearly see there's a pretty large difference. This window area here on the K3 Mark 1 image, there is nothing here. But on the K3 Mark 3 image, you can see just a tad bit of something that's outside. There's also a tad bit more definition within this section here. So that should give you an idea as to what I was working with regarding the DNGs and how each camera evaluated the scene and exposed for the shot. So looking at the JPEGs, this is the base JPEG image at 0 compensation, under or overexposed, just flat 0, perfect exposure. This is what they look like. And you can already tell that the K3 Mark III does retain highlight detail much better. If we zoom in here on this plant leaf, you can see the highlights are more prominent in the K3 Mark I image versus the K3 Mark III image. And if you also look carefully too here, the red color channel is also more controlled. The red here is more saturated, which longtime Pentaxians have always known. Pentax always had an issue with reds, magenta, those tones. They were always way oversaturated. So it looks like they have toned that down with the K3 Mark III. Okay, so that's 0. So let's just go in order here. So this is the -5 image. And again, you'll notice that the K3 Mark I, again, it's a brighter image. It's overexposed the highlights, but maintained shadow detail. However, the K3 Mark III just has better overall control and tone in regards to how it renders the images and does the metering. And again, same thing looking at this plant leaf here. Same thing. There's more detail in the plant leaf here. Let's just zoom in. Let's go all the way, baby. 100. There we go. Let's go 100 on here. Because apparently that's the only way to look at an image. Which, anyway, that's a whole other topic. But you can see this is a more faithfully recreated image than the blown highlights that are on the leaf for the K3 Mark I image. Right? So let's just move on here. Now this is what was that? That was -5. Let's go to -1. Actually, let's go to -3. Should be the same. Yep. So again, -3, lifting shadows, all that fun stuff. I had to redo the K3 Mark I image, and it was out of focus. When I redid it, the lighting was slightly different, and I had already moved the tripod, so I tried to get it back exactly how it was before. This is the closest I could get. I apologize. I know it's not 1,000,000% perfection with this one, However, it's not that far off to make a significant difference at all in regards to how it's metering the scene. And again, if you look at the controller, you can tell, like, there's just more highlights in the K3 Mark I image. It's like this across the board. It doesn't matter which image it was, right? It's just how it renders the images. Let's take a look at -1. And again, it's more of the same. Take a look at the leaf on this plant. Just highlight, 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 highlight. No, 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 no. Right? So again, they expose completely and utterly differently. Recovery aspects, they are very, very good, because the images were very, very dark, like ridiculously dark. That was -5 with the K3 Mark III. So there's the K3 Mark I image. That's how dark it was. So, there's no information along here. You can't make out any of the buttons or anything on the phone. Pretty dark. Pretty dark. So the recovery that they were able to do was actually pretty good, both of them side by side. However, I do have to give the nod to the K3 Mark III just in regards to the rendition of color, the saturation, and holding on to the highlight detail, right? Those are fundamental aspects, because highlights, as we know, are very, very hard to recover. They're just very hard to recover. And again, I didn't even try to recover this one on the K3 Mark I because it just was not going to happen. It was not going to happen at all. It's just way too sensitive to the highlights. They were way far gone. I wouldn't have even been able to get this detail here out of this planter. That's just that. It is what it is, right? But that's pretty much it. So that is dynamic range between the K3 Mark I and the K3 Mark III. The K3 Mark III is an improvement all across the board, from the autofocus to the color rendition to the high ISO capability and sharpness, micro contrast, shadow recovery, highlight recovery. Especially for an APS-C camera, it does have a lot of dynamic range that you can work with. And that's going to be the end of this video.